Good morning, good afternoon, and good night. Really quoting our buddy RJ here. As you can tell, I am not RJ Ochoa. My name is Pete Sweeney. Today's host of Monday Football Monday on the SB Nation Podcast Network. We'll hopefully have RJ back next week. We have the wonderful Rachel behind the virtual glass here. And as he has throughout the postseason and now the offseason, Jeremy Reisman joins me for today's show. Jeremy, can we handle this show without RJ, you think?
I think so. As the returning champion of this podcast, I'm willing to put a little bit extra on my shoulders this week. And we miss RJ, but at the same time, are we missing him that much?
I dip back into the 80s, and I remember that Apollo Creed said something similar heading into the following match, and we know how that turned out. Today's show, we'll be going through the latest mock draft on the SB Nation network and run through some big news items in the NFL as we get the offseason really started today. But first, a reminder that this show is brought to you by DraftKings. DraftKings Sportsbook is an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app today and use the code SBNNFL. I'm sorry, you know what? Is it SBN? Is it SBN NFL? SBN NFL. Really messing it up. For a special offer when you sign up. That's code SBN NFL only at DraftKings Sportsbook. All right. Now that I've completely butchered the ad read, let's get to the first story we want to talk about before we get to the great mock draft provided by our friends here at SB Nation. Jeremy, 26 NFL teams begin off-season workouts today. You ready for me to run through them quickly?
Sure.
Falcons, Ravens, Bills, Bears, Bengals, Browns, Cowboys, Lions, Packers, Jaguars, Chiefs, Raiders, Chargers, Rams, Dolphins, Vikings, Patriots, Saints, Giants, Jets, Steelers, 49ers, Seahawks, Buccaneers, Titans, Commanders all kick off the off-season program today. The ending was, I feel like the beginning and the middle was good there, but I really didn't do Billy Joel justice with the end there.
What else do I got to say? You nailed it.
Yes.
Yeah. So, it's a mark on the calendar. It doesn't really necessarily mean all that much other than the players are going to be together for the first time in the offseason. They'll do some lifting, things like that. They can't really even do many football activity things, but it's another sign that we are this much closer to football, which is always fun to just kind of turn that page.
Yeah, I think the reminder here is that these are voluntary. So a lot of times you'll see, and we're going to talk about it in a second, players with contract situations where they want extensions, they won't be showing up. And a lot of times when they're star players, you have fans that are kind of freaking out. But I think it's one of those Goose Fraba moments where, this is to be expected. This is part of negotiations. The other item to note here is that teams with new head coaches were actually able to begin a week early. So that is the Arizona Cardinals, Carolina Panthers, Denver Broncos, Houston Texans, and Indianapolis Colts. They began workouts last week. But, this is the first step in what is really, a step to that busy season. I was looking at the calendar today. It's about 140 days until opening night right here in Kansas City and 100 days until training camp. And, of course, Jeremy, now less than 2 weeks until the NFL draft.
Yeah, it's heating up, and I know other sports are kind of entering their prime here with the NBA playoffs and NHL playoffs kicking off, and the USFL starting up this past weekend. But
that's big.
But the NFL draft, I think, will kind of overshadow it all, and you can tell you're a little bit closer when OTAs start beginning. So it's like I said, there's not a lot of content other than the no shows. But it's another sign that the fact that we're even talking about it shows you how much of a dominant sport the NFL is right now.
We do have our latest mock that we're going to run through from Mark Schofield, JP Acosta, and Jared Miller. But first, we want to go around the NFL and just discuss some of the bigger names that are making headlines today. In New York or New Jersey, Florham Park, Quinnen Williams, defensive tackle, he is trying to get this contract extension. He will not be there for the start of the offseason program, Jeremy.
Yeah, like you said, this is just a negotiating tactic at this point. I wouldn't be freaking out if I was a Jets fan this morning. He's entering the I think it's his 5th-year option year, right? So coming off a 12-sack season, he's certainly warranted in asking for more, to get something done now instead of later. And I've already seen some people try to tie this to the Aaron Rodgers news. I don't think there's any necessarily linking thing there. I don't think they're waiting for they could be, but I don't think there's any necessary reason they have to wait for the Aaron Rodgers thing to go through before they take care of this. And Quinn Williams is a professional. I don't think he needs these voluntary offseason workouts either. So, holding pattern, nothing too serious yet, but you always at least lift an eyebrow when something like this happens.
Yeah, I don't think it has anything to do with Aaron Rodgers. Like, I don't think there's any crossover here. Now, however, I just think sometimes when you get into these negotiations and suddenly you are probably going to start Aaron Rodgers instead of, let's say, Zach Wilson or Mike White, like you start to get a little bit of leverage, I think, as the organization, because a young player like Quinn Williams is going to be want to be a part of that, right? So
Yeah.
I think very subtle, but you're right. I know that everything that has to do with anything New York Jets, you're trying to find a connection to Aaron Rodgers at this point. They seem to still be working on it. It's this grand stalemate between the Jets and the Packers, and I feel like we have one of these stories every year where for months we're just talking about the same thing. This year, I think it's in two places. It's Rodgers in Green Bay / New York, and it's Lamar Jackson and his saga in Baltimore. But I would tend to think that the Jets, Rodgers, Packers situation will come to a head before the NFL draft. You would have to think they have to come to some sort of agreement before this thing gets underway in less than 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's kind of how I've always viewed it. And I do think maybe there's a little bit more conflict than I've said in past weeks. I think in general, though, that this is mostly humming along at a fairly harmonious way, I would say. I know there's been reports that the Jets may have changed their offer after a Rodgers appearance on Pat McAfee and things like that. I don't know how much of that is true and how much of that isn't, but I'm with you. I think this eventually just gets taken care of either on draft night or before the draft, and then we can stop talking about it.
Yeah, I just think the McAfee thing has just created a definitiveness that didn't help either team, right?
Right.
Like they know the conclusion now. Both teams know the conclusion, and when you have a question of other teams entering the fold, that may pressure a team to go and get it done. When Aaron Rodgers comes out and says, I'm only playing for one team this year, the Jets know he's not playing for the Packers. The Packers know he's only playing for the Jets. And so it's created this really unique situation that only Aaron Rodgers in the day of the Pat McAfee show and some of his off the field antics could create. And here we are still in a holding pattern as of this podcast. We're recording about 10:45 Eastern time on Monday. Moving to the next story we want to hit. The Miami Dolphins, they agreed to a deal with chosen Robbie Anderson, and this is a change of scenery for Anderson. Does this move the needle at all for you, Jeremy?
Not really. I mean, he's about to turn 30. He fits the mold of what they want in Miami, right? That kind of speedy, but tall option. I mean, maybe that's what they're missing is an outside guy that can go up and get some balls there. But in general, I mean, we're talking about a guy who didn't have much of a season last year, 280 some yards total, split between Carolina and Arizona. And, he's certainly past his prime. And I think, he could certainly see an inflation in his stats in a Miami system, which is going to throw the ball a million times.
Right.
But at the same time, I think this is a quintessential mid-April move where it's just like, oh yeah, I remember that guy. Okay. That's where he's going now. Great.
He simply pops up. I tend to think what they're trying to do in Miami is create, in a sense, what the Chiefs had in Kansas City in this really speedy offense where you can get the ball to one of these receivers, be it now Anderson or Hill or Waddle in space. And if you give them a little bit of space, usually that means it's going for a long way. Of course, the problem, and I'm not trying to rattle up the Tuanon folk out there, is that Miami doesn't have Patrick Mahomes. And I know this is crazy. And Rachel, don't dock points for me. I do want to try to win the MFW MVP. When you only have two competitors, it's easier to win, of course. But I know it's still crazy, but isn't Tom Brady looking at this and saying maybe this is something that I want to come back to? Like,
oh boy,
we thought he was done last year. I mean, we did. I know that there was all the speculation with him attending the soccer games, but the scenario, all that off the field stuff was he wanted to go to Miami. And I don't know. I had said that my long-term prediction is even at the age of 45, maybe he takes a year off and tries to return once he has his family situation. sorted out. But I don't know. I know it's a small percentage, but I always have Brady on the mind when it comes to this Dolphins team because in a weird way, similar to New York, it's the only place Brady would come back to in my mind at this stage.
I feel like that's true. I think he's come to terms with it. And maybe you're right. Maybe a year away that changes his mind, but go get into coaching. Be in the front office. Do something. Just not that being in coaching is any less of a time commitment. It's probably even more of a time commitment, but I just think he needs to be done. Like I think he knows he needs to be done, and maybe just the time away will warp his mind again. But no, I think he needs to be done.
Yeah, I think there are a number of avenues for him to go off the field. We've already seen him get involved in women's soccer. I know that I'm sure there's broadcasting. I know he has a broadcast deal that is incoming. There's also the Tom Brady method. So there's a number of things that he could do. But I just always wonder, is this guy going to be able to fight those urges when training camp and this time of year begins? So I do think, again, I think it's low percentage, but it always is always something that I'm just kind of wondering. All right, last news story before we get to the mock draft here. Budda Baker has requested a trade from the Arizona Cardinals. The details here is he's owed $13.1 million this season, $14.2 million in 2024, and that was stemming from a 4-year, $59 million extension that he signed in 2020 that would make him the highest paid safety at the time. Now, Jeremy, Baker is 27 years old, requesting a trade. Doesn't want to be part of this pseudo rebuild there in Arizona. How interesting is this? How likely do you think it is that he is moved?
It's tough because I think he's got every reason to want to be traded. To be completely honest, he probably deserves to get paid more at this point. He's entering the prime of his career, and you're right. Like, this Cardinals team isn't one that necessarily provides him a chance to compete this year or really in the near future. I think you're looking at this Cardinals team and everyone wants out, DeAndre Hopkins included. So the question is just how willing and capable are they going to be to move him? And it's hard to know because I feel like more than any other season, Pete, like, we have heard a lot of names on the trade block, like in terms of either play. This was obviously an outright request, but we've heard rumors around guys like Devin White wants out, Mac Jones, Jonah Williams, Dalvin Cook, Kirk Cousins, Ryan Kelly, Mo Alley Cox, Ed Oliver, DeForest Buckner, like all these things, all the rumors, all the requests are happening. None of the trades are actually happening. Right. And so I just kind of get a sense like this is another negotiating tool that players are using, going public, saying, I want to get traded, and eventually it either fades away or gets smoothed up by the team.
Sans a few moves that happen, I think, around this time, right? So now we're in that 3 to 4 week period surrounding the NFL draft.
Yeah.
It kind of hits a standstill because I think at this point, GMs say to themselves, we kind of have to see how the NFL draft transpires. Right. As much as we want to predict the draft, and not to disparage mock drafts before we read one right here on the SB Nation NFL show, but things change really fast on draft night and plans change really fast. And it's hard to plan for beyond that when you get so close and you've already had certain parts of your plan of your offseason come to a head. Now, once we got close to the NFL draft last year, we had a number of trades that really impacted how the year went. I think the biggest one probably around the draft was AJ Brown going to the Philadelphia Eagles, right? Like, I don't know if the Philadelphia Eagles make the Super Bowl had they not made that deal. So we are simmering, but I think, as it goes, things will really start to heat up when we get close to the actual draft. And then you'll start to see, I think, some of these other chips falling when teams realize what needs they still have following the NFL draft.
Right. And that's why we see that second wave of free agency happen right after the draft too. And so we'll see some of those kind of lingering names that are still out there get picked up shortly after that.
All right. We have been around the block as far as news goes in the NFL. Obviously not a ton of news right now to discuss. So we're going to dive into the latest mock draft from Mark Schofield and our friends at the SB Nation flagship. And it starts with the Carolina Panthers, who own the number 1 overall pick, and they have decided to go with CJ Stroud. Let me read the first 2 picks right here. The Houston Texans, there had been some speculation as to what they might do. they end up taking Bryce Young out of Alabama. This has been a heavily debated topic, Stroud versus Young, and it's only the first chapter too, right? This is how the NFL goes, where
Right.
these guys will be connected to each other for the remainder of time, and one will win and one will be the secondary pick. And I think it's really going to be up to the Panthers to decide their fate when it comes down to that. I tend to think the Texans will go the other way, with their pick.
Yeah, it's hard to know. If you favor Vegas, I mean DraftKings Sportsbook, not to promote our own sponsor here, but
Sure.
heavy favorite for Bryce Young, minus 450 for him to be that first overall pick, where CJ Stroud is plus 320. So it's not particularly close. So Stroud goes to the Panthers in this mock. It seems like things are trending in the opposite direction, and it's tough, right? Because it feels like both guys provide way different things.
Mhm.
Bryce Young is a guy who really takes on his mobility and pocket presence. And to me, like, that's why I think he's the more attractive pick, is because that you see the best quarterbacks in the NFL today. And sure, it's about the arm at the end of the day, but it's also about being able to create those extra few seconds in the pocket and navigate the pocket and create plays with your feet. And I think CJ Stroud has the ability to do that, but he just hasn't done it in practice. He
Right.
seems a little bit more panicked in the pocket, and that can break down a play very, very quickly. So if you want maybe the more traditional pocket passer who has a tremendous arm, your guy's CJ Stroud. If you want maybe more the new age guy who can create with his feet, it's Stroud. And so things seem to be trending in Stroud's direction in the league and in this particular draft, but I can see why both are right up there in the conversation.
I think you're right. In maybe old school football, maybe they would go with Young, but it seems in this new age, in a weird way now, just the way things are, where it almost seems like that type of dynamic quarterback who's more of that athlete than I think, simply like sit in the pocket, manage the game type of guy. Having one of those has become the ultimate luxury. And so, when you're in a position to acquire that, it's just, I think, hard to turn down. But I think you made a great point about Las Vegas, right? It's becoming more commonplace to not look at Las Vegas as this dirty type of thing. And this has always been the case where, man, Vegas just seems to know, right?
Yeah.
450 is that's a
Huge.
heavy favorite. And so even though the mock draft went this way, at this point, I wouldn't deny that it goes the other way just simply upon those odds.
For sure.
All right, let's go to number 3, and we get our first trade in this mock draft at SB Nation. The Indianapolis Colts, they move up. Here are the terms of the trade. The Colts received the 2023 first round pick. The Cardinals get back the number 4 overall in the same draft, so they move down one slot. They also get the 2023 third round pick and the 2023 fourth round pick and a 2024 third round pick from the Colts for just simply moving up one slot. And why would the Colts do this if they're picking next and the Cardinals could go away? Well, the Cardinals could trade it to somebody else.
Yeah.
And with that pick, the Colts select Anthony Richardson out of Florida. Now, this would be that spice we're looking for, Jeremy.
Yeah. This is the Mitchell Trubisky trade, right? The move up one spot so that no one else moves ahead of you. But I think in this case, they're actually going to be bidding against other teams, whereas I don't know if the Bears were way back when. Because there was a report this past week, I think, from Schefter saying that the Cardinals have fielded trade offers from at least 6 teams.
Yeah, I heard that 6 teams. That was the number. Yes.
But Anthony Richardson is maybe the more interesting part of this, honestly, because he's that boomer bust candidate, right? He's a guy who has all the physical traits, just did not look like the consistent guy that I'd necessarily be willing to risk the third overall pick on. But a lot of people say you clean up that footwork, maybe the accuracy comes with it. You surround him with a better team. I mean, the Florida receivers were not very good in his 1 year as a starter, but to me, significant risk here, and you're also trading up for him. This is a tough one for me to accept, but very exciting pick nonetheless, and a guy with a tremendous ceiling. So could very much work out in the Colts' favor, but this is a huge risk, and I'm not sure if I were the Colts GM if I would be willing to make a move like this.
Well, it's got to be a full organization type of move, right? Because Anthony Richardson, he fits sort of what we were describing, and probably is the most athletic player maybe in the draft period. When you're looking
Yeah.
at NFL players that come out of the draft, you may look back and say, how did two teams, or if it doesn't go this way, X amount of teams let Richardson fall? How many times have we said that with Lamar Jackson now
Right.
over the years? And it has to be an organizational buy-in, right? It can't just be the GM. It has to be the owner that is going to be patient, maybe not get the results right away. It has to be the head coach who's going to build around the strengths of this guy. That's what you ran into with John Harbaugh and Lamar Jackson. And that's why they're trying to part of the reason they're trying to keep that thing together, because
Right.
it's just such a particular offense that was built around this quarterback. You can't really replicate that with too many different guys. And so I like it. I love a trade. I think anytime you get a trade in the NFL draft, it makes the night all the more interesting. And that's where mock drafts are tough, because say this were to happen, all the other drafts that maybe had it going another way, they're affected by one, and then you get that domino effect of the draft kind of getting muddled there. But wow, what a move this would be for the Indianapolis Colts. And I would think, I don't want to jinx Mr. Richardson here if this ends up going down. I would think that he could start for 2 seasons in a row and end that awful streak the Colts have had of not having a different, or not having the same starting quarterback in back-to-back
Right.
years in half a decade now going.
I just wonder if he's is he a year one starter though? That is also a fair question to ask. I mean, I think maybe you just have to at this point because you're spending the 3rd overall pick on him, but I don't know if he's ready.
Yeah. So in another way, you might be extending the streak to one more year.
One more year, exactly.
In taking Anthony Richardson. All right, let's go to number 4. So now the Cardinals are picking in number 4, and they go with Will Anderson, the pass rusher from Alabama. Is this the right pick in your eyes, Jeremy?
I think this is maybe the most solid pick so far. I think you get the trade down, you pick up some extra pieces, and you get, I think, the safest defensive prospect. I won't necessarily say the best, because I think that might be someone else, but safest. I mean, a world of production at Alabama, which is obviously not easy to do. A guy that can kind of play multiple roles for you there on the edge as well. I just think this is a guy who may have been the best edge rusher if he had gone in last year's draft as well. I feel like we've gotten into the part of draft season where people are picking apart Will Anderson's game and saying like he's actually not as good as everyone says. I think that's nonsense. I think you look at his full tape at Alabama, that is the dude. So I think this is a really good, really safe pick for Arizona, and you pick up a couple extra picks along the way too. Maybe you could have gotten more value out of a trade down further down and gotten a second tier of defensive players, but you need some blue chippers on that defense, especially with an aging roster, especially on the defensive side of the ball over there in Arizona.
Yeah, I think after a quarterback, which the Cardinals are saying with an exclamation point here, right? Kyler Murray is our guy. I know there have been some questions in recent years with that. I think after quarterback, if you want to tell me the next most important thing is tackle, okay, maybe I'll buy that, but very close second is edge, right? You need to have pass rushers that affect the other quarterback, and I think this is the right move. And you're right. It is the quote unquote safest pick. And that has to do with what we will be saying if the Seattle Seahawks with their 5th pick go with Jalen Carter of Georgia. And we know that there has been some off the field. We know he's going to fall. And what I would say is I know there's a lot to explore. I know if you root for a certain team, maybe you don't want them to go in this direction, but here's the bottom line. Someone is taking this player in the 1st round, right? Yeah. And if a team is on the board and they're looking at, okay, should we pull the trigger here? If they don't, someone else will. And the way that the news cycle works and the way the world works, everybody loves a redemption story. And after he gets a year, does the right things, gets involved in the community and things like that, obviously gets the help he needs, a year from now, you might be looking at this pick and being like, well, this was a no-brainer in the world of the NFL in a sense. So he falls to 5 and the Seahawks end up with him. What do you think about that pick, Jeremy?
I think it makes a lot of sense. I think this is, if I had to pick a pick from this mock that I think is going to actually happen, I think this might be the one I pick. You mentioned all the character stuff, and I feel like Seattle's a great landing spot for them. They've taken risks before, and some of them worked out, some of them haven't, but they're willing to take on those guys that either have off-field issues, or some people have said that maybe Jalen's off-field issues have slipped into his game. It depends on who you ask. Some people say his tape is full of effort. Some people say it's inconsistent effort. I don't necessarily have a strong opinion one way or the other, but I feel like Seattle is the team that usually takes on a player like this and more often than not benefits from it. He's a guy that I would love to the Lions at 6. But I'm not sure the culture fit is there in Detroit. I do think the culture fit is there in Seattle. And so I think this pick makes a lot of sense.
Well, you're Mr. Detroit, and if you say no Jalen, then they can't draft him. So
I want him though.
Carter is the favorite at DraftKings Sportsbook, by the way, at plus 200. This is from Pro Football Talk, and I'm just going to read the latest update here. No one disputes Carter's talent, but there have been off-the-field issues, as we talked about, most notably the involvement in a car crash that left one of his teammates and a Georgia football staffer dead. Carter pled no contest Thursday to misdemeanor charges of reckless driving and racing in connection with that incident. And Drew Rosenhaus, his agent, remains confident that he will be a top 10 pick, and I can't see it going another way based upon some of the things that I mentioned. So they're going with the chalk here. Let's go to the next pick, number 6. What a time to be alive. The Detroit Lions picking in the top 10, and we consider them Super Bowl contenders on this show. So that's an ultimate advantage. They go with Tyree Wilson, pass rusher out of Texas Tech. Your reaction to your Lions taking Mr. Wilson?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a nightmare scenario when you're picking 6 overall, but I think this is probably worst case scenario for the Lions. 3 quarterbacks and the top 2 defensive players going before them. So they have to kind of, I think there is now a noticeable step down in terms of defensive talent. I'm not huge on Tyree Wilson. He's kind of the athletic freak, right? Like the guy who has all the physical tools, not a ton of the production. He got better as his career went on at Texas Tech, but the production numbers, the sack numbers were pretty low. He's got a foot injury that has kind of made him sit out a lot of the off-field testing. I think he's a little bit slow off the snap. So I think if I had to pick, I might go corner here, whether it's Christian Gonzalez or Devin Witherspoon, whichever one you kind of like more. The Lions have, I would say, equal needs on both sides, whether it's an edge, whether it's corner. A lot of people look at the Jeff Okudah trade and say, wow, the Lions really need a corner now. That's not really true. He was lined up as like CB4 or CB5, which is why they traded him. But there's still a long-term need there. They have CJ Gardner-Johnson signed for 1 year. They have Emmanuel Mosley signed for 1 year. So I would rather go corner here. I think there's a little too many red flags there with Tyree Wilson for me to believe that he's head and shoulders above of the corner prospects here.
Yeah, that's an interesting debate, and I think it also gets into the philosophy of defensive football, right? What position is more important? And that goes into weighing different things, because it's hard to run from a pass rusher, right? Quite literally and figuratively. If you have a stud cornerback, like let's say the Lions, where you could throw to the other side, you could throw underneath, those type of things. And so if the talent's the same, I'd like to see a team that needs an edge take an edge, but I think you're right here. And of course you're on the pulse of this with a top 10 pick running prior to Detroit, that there is a question there. And so we'll see which way the Lions end up going with number 6, but let's move on to number 7. To the AFC West we go. The Las Vegas Raiders, they went and got Jimmy Garoppolo this past offseason, and they go with a quarterback here out of Kentucky, Will Levis, taking him with the pick. What do you think about this pick, Jeremy?
I think this one is fairly realistic as well. I mean, obviously, they didn't commit a long-term deal to Garoppolo, so they could be looking for a long-term deal. I don't think necessarily they're in a position where they think they can compete right away. And so getting a quarterback that might not start year 1 makes some logical sense to me. Levis is an interesting guy, right? I think he was, 2 months ago, he was drawing all these comparisons to, the big physical and athletic Josh Allen's, of you will, of the NFL. And so for whatever reason, that seems to have died down a lot. And I get it, like there's some inconsistency issues, but I think a lot of that can be explained by a supporting cast, right? Kentucky it had a massive exodus of talent on the offensive side of the ball, and that's going to affect any quarterback in the league. I mean, you talk about CJ Stroud and Bryce Young, those guys had endless amount of talent. Like as soon as one wide receiver class left, another one came in. Levis didn't really have that benefit, and so I think that's why you saw a dip in production last year. Has a little bit less to do with him, I think, as a quarterback, and a little bit more to do with the supporting cast. So I like the pick, actually.
Yeah, here was the write up, a portion of it from our great team at SB Nation. Levis needs some work, particularly with his lower body mechanics, footwork, and decision making. But if he landed in Carolina with the 9th overall pick, the wealth of coaching experience the Panthers have around the quarterback could have made Carolina the ideal place for him. But with the Panthers drafting someone at the top of the board, the next best landing spot would be Vegas. And I want to talk about Jimmy Garoppolo for a second here. I got a chance to cover Alex Smith here in Kansas City, and I think the Chiefs in what was it, 17, when they drafted Mahomes, that has led, I think, a lot of teams to trying to replicate that, right? And I think that's been tough for teams to do because you have to sort of, in a way, rattle the veteran, which can go one way or another. It doesn't always go so swimmingly. And I think the expectation is, okay, we give a year of that Mahomes seasoning, suddenly we'll have maybe not Mahomes, but a top 10, top 15 type of quarterbacks. And it doesn't always translate. I think it was a very particular situation in Kansas City with Al and Andy Reid and Patrick, obviously with the uber talent. And then you look at this particular situation. I feel for Garoppolo in a sense because he's kind of gotten caught in I think the Alex Smith funk of his career. It's like, say the Raiders do go in this direction, it's never, we got our guy in Jimmy. He's our guy for the next 5 to 10 years. I think we can win with this guy. It's always like, well, you know what? He's good enough to win. And in the meantime, he can mentor this quarterback who we really like. And that's just, it's a tough place to be for Jimmy G.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I've come from the Detroit Lions where Jared Goff is going through that same kind of conundrum with fans. Like a lot of people think he is the Alex Smith. A lot of people think he's more than that. And so it led to the Lions GM saying something that I think is really poignant, if not obvious. Which he said, it's a lot easier to get worse at quarterback than it is to get better. And so you're right. I think a lot of people think they look at Alex Smith going from that to Patrick Mahomes and say, oh yeah, let's just do that. But in the meantime, you're blowing up something good for the chance at something great, but also for the chance at taking a major step at the quarterback position, which is a very dangerous thing to do in this league.
Yeah, and the sad thing is it may be the same type of scenario where say this were to go down, Garoppolo would get the year, and then it would be limbo, and maybe trying to find a new team next year with a trade. And I'm sure he at this stage is like, have you seen how much I won? Quarterback wins are a stat. Don't you guys understand that? All right, let's go to the Atlanta Falcons with number 8. You talked about the Lions maybe going in the direction of cornerback. They have them taking Christian Gonzalez, the cornerback out of Oregon. And, there has been some questions as to which cornerback would go first. Do you feel like this will be the player that goes first? And do you like the fit in Atlanta?
Man, it's interesting because they obviously did just do the Jeff Okudah trade, and so if they were to knock him down a spot on the depth chart, it would negate, I think, some of the value of that trade. But it's really a pick your poison to me with these two guys, because obviously Christian Gonzalez is like the prototypical size speed combo, and 6'1", long, fast, all those sort of things that I think in a lot of ways that's where the league is trending. They love those long, tall corners. Mm-hmm. But if you're looking for a personality fit, I think Devin Witherspoon is a better prospect. He's more instinctive. He's more willing to get his nose dirty in the run game. That's why I like him for the Lions for a better fit, but that might be a Lions specific thing. Like, I think the Lions would have Devin Witherspoon higher on his board than other teams would. So I think I think it's maybe a safer thing, right? I think Christian Gonzalez is probably the safer pick because of the size, because of the production. Whereas Witherspoon is, he's 5'11", which isn't, I mean, it's not short. I don't want to act like a 5'11" corner is way out of the ordinary in this league. It's not, but it's not that prototypical long, tall guy. So I think it's a good fit. I think the Falcons could definitely use more. I don't think they should be relying on Jeff Okudah to be a day one starter. So I think this makes a lot of sense. And it wouldn't surprise me if that was the pick for Atlanta.
Yeah, you're right about the size. Came in at 6 feet 197 pounds. That's about, if you're on create a player in Madden, you might be heading in that direction. You mentioned Witherspoon in this particular draft, because we're only going to read the top 10. A lot of ankle eating traits. Unfortunately, they go to the New England Patriots at number 14 later on in this draft. So we have the Falcons taking Gonzalez. We have 2 more picks we're going to go through right here. We're reading the top 10. You can get this mock draft, the latest mock draft at sbnation.com. At number 9, the Chicago Bears go with Broderick Jones out of Georgia, the offensive tackle. What do you make of this pick, the first big pick in what is the GM career of Ryan Poles?
Yeah, no, I think offensive tackle makes complete sense. I think this is what the Bears should and probably will do. I think my issue or my question, I guess it's not really much of a question because I haven't made, I haven't put my flag in the ground here, but the best offensive tackle in this class, I'm not sure if it's Broderick Jones. I feel like a lot of people would point to Northwestern's Peter Skoronski, Paris Johnson from Ohio State, even Darnell Wright from Tennessee. He's a guy that shut down Will Anderson pretty heavily when they went toe to toe this year. So it's again, it's personal preference, right? I don't think there's the problem for the Bears is I don't think there's a clear cut number 1 guy. That's not to say that these guys aren't starting capable left tackles in this league. I just don't know which one I think is there. And I don't think there is like a Lane Johnson type where you have your tackle for the next 15 years and he's going to be a top 5 annual Pro Bowl type of guy.
I think Chicago doing what they did and getting out of that top of the draft was, to me, maybe the best thing that's happened this offseason, because there have been some questions as to like whether or not they would be all in on Fields. And I think this pick really fits the idea of leaning into Justin Fields and all that he might be able to do for his team. We know that the Bears will want to continue to give him weapons, right? They already have Darnell Mooney, Chase Claypool, and DJ Moore in the mix, but you also want to protect the guy, right? You got to keep him on the field. That's a big part of this thing. And so this makes all the sense in the world. I think the position is right, as you were mentioning, but because of a little bit of the parity there, we'll see which direction Ryan Poles goes in. I personally have a tremendous amount of respect for Ryan Poles. I know a lot of people here in Kansas City thinks he is going to be one of the better GMs in the league as we go here, but when you're dealing with that rebuild, you have to maybe wait a few years, and we'll see how fast. Hey, look, they got the quarterback, so that's the hardest part. So once you have the quarterback in place, maybe this thing can happen sooner than people realize. I do believe at the end of this offseason, the Bears are going to be a spicy pick to win a wild card. I don't know if there are going to be a lot of people picking them to win the division, but I could see a lot of people putting them in at like a 6th or a 7th to get into the playoffs.
Yeah,
and say a year ahead of schedule, which is a popular football cliche. Yeah.
And I think that's important to point out too. Like if they were, whatever, last year's Lions team where they're just on the cusp of making the playoffs, like that should be a wildly successful, that should be considered a wildly successful season for the Bears. I think playoffs, they're certainly possible. The NFC is what it is. It's not a very deep group of teams there. And the NFC North in particular, not a particularly deep division. And so they should have a pretty easy schedule. But you look at the roster, like they added a lot to the linebacker room. Their secondary is full of a bunch of 2nd and 3rd year players. So if they take that 2nd and 3rd year leap, maybe this team is a little bit more contending, but I think they still have a lot of work to do on both the offensive and defensive line. And so that's why I think offensive tackle is a great pick for him here.
Wrapping up our mock draft review here on Monday Football Monday on the SB Nation Podcast Network, the Philadelphia Eagles, the reigning NFC champions, almost got it done in Phoenix, not quite though. Nolan Smith, the pass rusher from Georgia. When you see the Eagles go and make this move, Jeremy, what's your immediate reaction?
What are the Eagles up to? That's kind of my first reaction is like, what do they know that I don't know? And listen, they've added so much to that defensive line over the past few years. Nolan Smith is just kind of a fascinating guy. He's only 238. So, he could definitely play some off ball a little bit for the Eagles if that's what they plan on using him for. But not a ton of production, but if you want to talk about a Dan Campbell kind of guy, like he is a tenacious guy who has a high motor, who's going to fight and claw and run every player down that he can and play to the whistle, all those kind of tropes. So you stick him on a defensive line with the Eagles that has a bunch of other weapons, like they'll find a way to utilize him in a way that's effective. I don't know if he's my, next edge on the board, but there's little doubt to me that the Eagles will find a way to utilize this guy and really make teams pay with him.
The mock notes that Smith has taken meetings with the Patriots and the Eagles, and they're is the line here. He's a bit of a tweener, but one of the comparisons you see for him is Hassan Reddick. It might make sense for Howie Roseman to have two players on the edge like that next season. So this would be a very interesting pick. When you start to get to this part of the draft, and again, we're only going to cover the top 10 picks here, but that middle of the draft, you could start to see tendencies. And sometimes this is where teams, they stop going, as they would say, scratch or chalk, where they have maybe some insight that maybe a certain team doesn't have. And that's where you can really, I think, like the value of the NFL draft usually starts around this time, Jeremy.
Yeah, no question. I think you're right. Like, it's a really good way to put it. Is where the tendencies start to show up in terms of favoritism, in terms of kind of players that you like. Whereas, this is where you'll start to see like Mel Kiper's big board will still have his number 5 player, but other teams don't value those players in the same way, whether it's differing systems, whether it's differing skill sets that they prioritize. And so this is a great example of it, where I could definitely see the Eagles doing something like this, whereas people might think Lucas Van Ness out of Iowa or Miles Murphy out of Clemson might be the higher rated prospect for the Eagles. Maybe it's Nolan Smith.
Right. I mean, and this is where mocks, and like, especially the mocks of the insiders, to me, are the most worth watching and worth reading, because, a lot of times you see mocks around the internet and it's more of a big board, but it's those mocks that like they really heard, a lot. Those are the ones especially when you get close to the end. Like, I know there's one that comes out at NFL.com that Peter Schrager does. I believe he only does one, and he's always in tune with GMs and what their plans are and whatnot. And look, he tries to talk to people and find out, and then he's usually completely wrong, just like every other
right.
mock. And
we're also that time of year too, where are you hearing this stuff because the teams are wanting to put it out, or are you actually getting closer to the truth? And it's always impossible, really, to kind of sift through the differences there.
I love a smoke and pivot. I love a bait and switch, and the NFL draft season is ripe for that. I want to close here because our biggest move, I think, of this draft was the Colts, right? Of this mock draft that our guys put together. Again, you can get it at SBNation.com. And I wanted to read you this tweet that Jim Irsay, the owner of the Colts, sent this weekend. For the 2023 draft, we have many options. With the number 4 pick, we could stay put and take a quarterback, or trade up and take a quarterback, or trade down and maybe take a quarterback, or not. And then he drops a smiley emoji. And he says, all options are on the table, but we like our position and are very excited. Fire up! Exclamation point. And also he added a football emoji, and then added 4 pictures of different quarterbacks that are eligible to be taken in this draft. And so I think that plays right into your comment about the smoke. People don't really want you to know what they're doing in the NFL draft, because that impacts value and what you might be able to get back, and really acquiring what are considered to be your guy or my guys. And I think that really ramps up as we get to, post number 10. But it should be interesting. And I think of all the teams, right, like the way that you kind of watch this, the Colts are the team to watch. I do feel like they will go up and get somebody. It's just a matter of when they pull the trigger.
Yeah. But there's so many different, like the Texans, right? The rumors are lately that they might go defense. And if they go defense, well, then is there a bidding war for that 3rd overall pick to get CJ Stroud or Bryce Young or whoever is the quarterback not taken in the top 2? And like, I've even speculated like the Lions could theoretically be that team. They brought in CJ Stroud for a visit. They brought in Will Anderson for a visit. The Lions traded up 20 spots in the 1st round, and they have a bunch of draft capital this year. Could they trade up and throw everything askew to pick 3? I do think there's going to be some sort of big surprising move either at that 2nd or that 3rd pick that can really have, like you said, that domino effect that really affects everything that happens after it.
I think that in the business of football, you have these general managers, and Nick Caserio's up against it right now, right? Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, it would be him not going quarterback would be a big time, like hanging onions type of move, because I think his job is on the line. And I think when you have these GMs with their job on the line, sometimes they are more apt to take a quarterback that they like, because it resets the clock in a sense, right? They're not going to just take a quarterback. I know they got the new head coach, DeMeco Ryans, in there, and Texans fans are all fired up about that, how it's going to be back to that old school Texans football.
Sure.
But look, the quarterback room is Davis Mills, Case Keenum, and EJ Perry. So if you end up going in a different direction here, look, you better be right. And it's hard for me to wrap my head around the Texans pivoting from that. But like you said, Jeremy, you never know. And when you own a number 2 pick in a draft with a lot of quarterbacks, you can get a lot of players on rookie deals back if you do somehow feel that Davis Mills, who was part of a 2 quarterback tandem last year, is going to be okay for you in 2023. So it remains to be seen. A lot of questions heading into this NFL draft. I want to promote it one more time. If you want to go and read the entire thing, we haven't talked about your team, you can right now at SBNation.com. NFL mock draft : updated first round projection after the free agency frenzy. Always like our mock drafts coming out at SB Nation. And with that being said, let's if she's up, can you wake up? Wake up, Rachel. No, we'd like to welcome
We didn't talk about the Ravens at all. We usually talk about the Ravens all the time.
I'm good.
Yes. So as RJ does it, I'm trying to do my best here. We need your top takes from the episode, and then of course awarding our MF double MVP.
Yeah. So my top takes go into the point system for today's MF double MVP.
Wow.
And rightfully so.
A point system. That's scary. Okay.
Notes right here.
Oh, wow.
And so starting with just like your guys' thoughts on like the NFL news, I really enjoyed Pete's point about the Dolphins and how they're high key trying to create a similar system to like the Chiefs had. And how that kind of went into the conversation about Tom Brady and is he really out? I agree with Jeremy on that point that I hope that he's done. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like it's been enough. Went out, came back, but now I think that let's just like allow him to pursue something different. And so I agree with Jeremy on that point that I think he needs to be done. I really like Jeremy's point when you just mentioned all of the different players who have requested trades, but it's like nothing's really happened so far. So it's kind of like, I guess we just have to kind of wait and see. Maybe that's just a part of their negotiation tactic. And then after the draft, we'll revisit it based on who's still available. I also like when you guys were talking about like Anthony Richardson. Jeremy, you were talking about how he's kind of like that boom or bust candidate. And
this is not looking good for me. I mean, I have not had a lot of marks on this paper.
But at the same time, with that point, I don't know if you said this, Pete, but you were talking about how it would be nice to see him in that quarterback carousel for the Colts. And so I would be that person to take the risk compared to Jeremy, who wouldn't be just because of the player. Maybe even seeing him with the Panthers because of Cam Newton. Like I was that person. I have been like that person who's kind of like, I want to see him fall at number 1 because even though all of the risk that we're hearing about and the inaccuracy and the lack of consistency, he is a unique player. And the fact that he's being compared to Cam Newton, I think that's perfect. That would be like such a fun storyline. And so I would take the risk. I want to see him at number 1. But
like
I'm rooting for the kid. I like him a lot.
Yeah. But yeah, those are most of my heavy hitting points. And so based off of today, I am going to give it to Jeremy.
2-time champ.
Back to back. Back to back.
This is the second time I've filled in for RJ hosting, and the second time I didn't win MF double MVP.
Oh, it's okay.
On the same episode. So there's no credit for filling in a host the last minute.
But a phenomenal job.
It's because you got the code wrong. Let's be honest.
Yeah, I was a little bit confused as to what the code is. It's SBN NFL. Just for all you out there that are trying to get on to DraftKings Sportsbook. But we'll keep the coverage coming at SBNation.com. Certainly Arrowhead Pride, certainly Bleeding Green Nation, certainly Pride of Detroit as we get closer to the NFL draft that is happening in just 2 short weeks. This will really ramp up the offseason. And I don't know if you guys feel this way, but I feel like once we have the draft, man, it goes so fast. And then suddenly we're back into games. The real break is, I think, right now. And then there's like a slight break before training camp. But other than that, I mean, this thing takes off. So, that the whole world will be watching the draft right here in Kansas City, actually, this year, which is pretty cool, I think, for the city. And we'll see how it goes. Jeremy, how are you feeling about the Lions Super Bowl chances as we close the episode?
Listen, 6th overall pick, the 18th overall pick. They're in a good position to make swing. I honestly think their roster right now is top 5 in the NFC already. And so you add on a couple of big picks. They also have 2 second-round picks, and they can make some noise. I do think they might spend these picks to plan a little bit more down the line, which means they aren't necessarily adding a ton to this year's roster necessarily. But I think I'm just kind of, I don't want to get too excited about this year because I think they're set up for a couple of years down the line. So
you're allowed. Hey, look,
I'm
caution to the wind.
No, that's not who I am. This is why I don't want Anthony Richardson. Like, I am a coward. I don't want to put my heart on the line too much here. This team hasn't won a playoff game since 1992. Like, let's just get there. Let's just host a playoff game for the first time at Ford Field, win that, and then everything else is icing on the cake.
Rachel, let's see Baltimore jump up and say, "What now, Lamar?" And go get Richardson. How about that?
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
All right, RJ will be back next week. Thank you to Rachel. Thank you to Jeremy. This has been another episode of Monday Lions Monday.